The difference between Eastern and Western hunting. That is what we are going to talk about today. Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, hunting, the right way with God Almighty at the center. Biblical, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I'm blessed to serve you as host. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I don't apologize for that. Military, law enforcement, private security, contracting, competition shooting background. Also been a hunter since I was young. And germane to today's episode, I've been blessed to hunt all over this beautiful country. From the southeast where I grew up all the way to Alaska. I live now on purpose in what I would consider the last vestiges of free America, the Wild West, the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. I live for on purpose. I've turned down higher paying jobs and left higher paying jobs to live out here, mostly for the freedom, but also largely for the hunting. I like being able to literally hunt elk in my backyard. My backyard is adjacent to public lands where I can hunt millions and millions of acres that adjoin to other millions and millions of acres of public land. More than I could explore in a lifetime. And that's just right behind my house. That is one of the main differences of Eastern versus Western hunting. Now, before I get further into that, this is a broad topic. I could get into the weeds and the minutia and make this an entire separate podcast where I could talk for years about the difference between Eastern and Western hunting. So this is vast generalities, and I'm going to leave a lot of stuff out. So, yeah, caveat there. But a major difference is the land, and I don't just mean topography. I mean population density. Population density matters a lot. This is not about hunting, but it reminds me of a post that one of the patrons put up yesterday in our group chat, and and it's hard for me to keep all the patrons straight, but I think he came from Tennessee, and he posted he's going on a fishing trip to Wyoming, and he said, fishing's a lot easier here in Wyoming. But yeah, man, population density matters. I posted 2 pictures on there. I think the population density of Tennessee, which is one giant city basically to me, 170 some people per square mile. Probably more than that because the population is steadily going up. The population density in Wyoming is 6 people per square mile. So yeah, I imagine it is. Competition for resources. So that said, the American West, large swaths of it, is one of the last free places, period. Right? If we think about when our forefathers came to America and hacked their way into the wilderness to spread Christianity, that was a large part of it. Like the Puritans came here to escape from people telling them that they couldn't read the Bible for themselves and follow the Bible the way they wanted to, right? They came here and died in large numbers for the ability to worship God the way that they saw fit and to be Christian and to form a Christian nation. We were made as a Christian nation and formed as a Christian nation. And part of what they had to do was come here and hack their way in the wilderness. Most of them just, I think people think that our forefathers just knew how to hunt, but the people that came here came from Europe. And hunting was largely not for them back there. It was for the nobility. It was for the landed gentry. The average common man could not hunt deer. It was against the law. It was the king's deer, right? We came here, our Christian European forefathers, and figured out how to hunt. A word of encouragement, if they could do it back then, you can do it now. But they came to the east, which at that point was the wilderness, and they quickly settled it. And I would submit most of the East Coast, east of the Mississippi, has not been wild since the late 1700s, right? Shortly after Daniel Boone went through the Cumberland Gap. And quickly after that, a bunch of settlers followed, and even he went out west because it was too settled for him. That was in the late 1700s, maybe early 1800s. But since then, everything east of the Mississippi is basically civilized. Getting back to the main difference, if you look up a public land map of the United States, You have very few exceptions on the East Coast. You have like northern Maine. And you have maybe little patches of like Kentucky, West Virginia. But they're little patches compared to out west. If you look at like Nevada, something like 80 or 90% of that is public land. If you look at a state place where I like to reside, the largest wilderness area is outside of Alaska. Land without roads. I don't mean like a patch of woods. I mean like it would take you months to walk across it if you were just walking across it and not stopping. Areas of wilderness with no roads. That's what I'm talking about, that freedom. That's a large reason why I live out west, not just for the hunting, but for the freedom. The fact that I could literally just walk behind my house and maybe not have contact with another person for months if I chose to. I love that. Part of that calls to me. Jesus went into the cities a lot, but Jesus often went out to the wilderness to pray. Right? The Bible says that, right? He often withdrew to the wilderness. I like to withdraw to the wilderness. If you want wilderness, again, with very few exceptions on the East Coast, you're going to have to go west. That's a big difference between East Coast and Western hunting, is the vast tracts of public land. Meaning like, you're part owner of it. You can just go hunt it without any permission, without anybody's leave, without the king's stamp of approval. You can just go out there and hunt because it's your land too. It's public land. You own it, I own it, we own it. It's a great thing. And there's millions and millions of acres out there with your name on it if you would just come and take it. If you would just come and hunt it. If you would just move and live out here. There's plenty of East Coasters that come out here in carpetbag, but there's plenty of people that come out here and fall in love with it and stay out here. You could do that too if you chose to. But most won't. Most will stay home. I think the stat, surprisingly, is like the vast majority of the population lives within like 18 miles of their mom. So a lot of people won't do that. I get that. But if that calls to you, you might at least want to check it out. But the vast tracts of public land. Getting back to the East Coast, I grew up hunting on the East Coast. I grew up a poor boy in the South, and I wasn't part of the landed gentry back there, right? I didn't have family members that owned, hundreds and thousands of acres. I was the bastard son of a single teenage mom. Didn't have a lot of land access, so I would hunt swamps and little small tracts of land. Back there, growing up, we did a lot of hunting on stands. Even back then, I didn't like it. I just thought that was the way that it was. That was just the way that you hunted deer. And back in the East, that largely is how you hunt deer, because you can't just walk for hours and hours and hours without getting arrested because you're on somebody's private land. You're kind of literally stuck up a tree because you really can't walk around. If you walked around, you'd blow out your whole hunting area in a half an hour, because a lot of people hunt on like 40 acres or less. So there's a lot of stand hunting on the East Coast. Unless you just get into some weird place out west where somebody just does it because they own a little piece of land and that's all they want to do, almost nobody hunts in tree stands out west. It's just not a thing. Now, even growing up back east, I didn't really like that, sitting in a stand. I thought it was miserable sitting there, no matter how many clothes you have on, like your feet are cold. I just didn't like it, and I didn't like sitting still even back then. I would do a lot of hunting out of a canoe, which I really liked. I access a lot of nasty, swampy, salt marsh and freshwater cypress swamps and stuff that nobody else really wanted to hunt. But I was happy to hunt them because there weren't many people there. But largely back east, you're hunting out of a stand. Still hunting and tracking and spot and stalk hunting, which is something I really love, was kind of foreign to me growing up. But that is the way that I like to hunt out west. And this is the way I think a lot of people still hunt out west, despite what marketing hype would have you believe, despite, the gun tube glitterati and, YouTube entertainers, whatever, and that's fine. That's all fine. Like, I'm not against that if you just want to watch gun content for entertainment. But I think a lot of that would have you believe that you need a 1,000-yard rifle and some giant obese scope with a bunch of magnification to hunt out west. And I fell into that trap when rangefinders first became a thing, right? I fell into that probably in the in the, would that be the late aughts, back when rangefinders finally became affordable. And I was like, I had already lived out west, and I briefly went back to the East Coast, couldn't stand it, wanted to go back out west. I did. And I was like, I'm going to get into this western hunting. This is not really that new. Things move in cycles. And I was like, I'm going to get this rifle with this big old scope and all this stuff and, tripods, bipods. I forget. I had a bunch of junk. And do all this long-range shooting. I did a bunch of long-range shooting. And I shot my first pronghorn at like 150 yards. And I was like, well, okay, maybe I don't need all this crap. And I don't really enjoy it. I like the pinning myself and my shooting skill, not how well I can work a computer to get a deer. If I wanted to work on a computer, I'd be an accountant sitting in a freaking cubicle. I go hunting to get away from that crap. I go hunting to get away from screens and electronics. I don't want to be sitting there looking at my phone. I don't want to be sitting there, using a laser rangefinder. I don't want to be sitting there behind a spotting scope on my butt all day. And if I wanted to do that, why not just sit in a cubicle and order ground beef? I want to get out there and hike the mountains. I want to get out there and do this stuff. So despite what marketing would have you believe, you don't actually need that stuff. And a lot of people I know don't hunt that way. People that actually hunt out west, not like carpetbaggers that come out and want to use their giant OB scope for something to justify their purchase. I mean people that routinely go out every year and put elk in the freezer. So spot and stalk and still hunting and tracking, again with few exceptions. Oh, and I think the Adirondacks have a pretty big chunk of land that's like not exactly public land, but it's like state public land that anybody can hunt on. But then you'd have to go to New York and probably couldn't carry a handgun. So I don't know what that's about. But with very few exceptions, there's not a lot of tracking going on back east because you can't walk for hours and hours and hours following an animal. You can't track an animal. You can't spot and stalk hunt really. Sometimes you can, but it's rare. But you can do that out west, and that's something that I really, really like, is spot and stalk hunting, still hunting, and tracking. They're not the same, but they're all kind of similar, and I love all of them, depending on the conditions. But you have the land to do that out west. Another difference I'm going to hit on for eastern versus western hunting is back east, you just about always take your deer out whole. You take it out whole and you hang it, and then you take it to a shed or a barn or a tree. You pull it up in the tree or the barn or whatever. You hang it up and you butcher it. You pull it out with a tractor. You pull it out with some kind of wheeled vehicle, or you just drag it out. Because on the East Coast, even in the so-called mountains, which, like the Appalachians would be considered like foothills compared to where I live in the Rockies, you're usually not further than a mile away from a road, even if you include dirt roads and trails that you could get a vehicle on. You're usually not more than a mile away from that. If you get more than a mile away from one, you're usually getting a mile closer to the other. So it's generally possible to drag a deer out whole. And a deer is usually the biggest thing you're going to hunt there, with the exception of the odd large black bear, but which I grew up hunting and liked. But even when I grew up hunting in the Appalachians, sometimes for bear, you can drag it out whole. You could lash its arms and legs together, put it on a pole, and carry it out with one or two guys on a pole on your shoulders. You're not doing that out west in many places. If you have permission to hunt somebody's private, alfalfa ranch out west and you can get a tractor out there, okay, but that's rare. I'm talking about public land hunting. So a major difference is I grew up learning how to butcher the East Coast way, which is shooting the animal, dragging it out whole, dragging it by the back legs or dragging it by the antlers, and gutting it, dragging it out whole, and hoisting it up in the air and butchering it a little piece at a time. Out west, you generally, if you're hunting big tracts of public land the way that I like to hunt, you're generally packing that animal out on your back in pieces. If you bone out a deer in the field, you can generally pack out a whole deer on your back. But an elk, you're not packing out, even in one piece generally. So unless it's a small elk or something, and you're just a beast, I guess. But I don't know that you could pack out all the available meat in one go on your back for an elk. You're generally doing it in pieces, in quarters. So you're doing a whole different method. You're not taking it out whole, dragging it out, hoisting it up, and like going through the anatomy and being very, taking your time, gutting the animal and then hanging it up and then coming back maybe the next day or that night after you've had, something to drink or whatever, and coming out into the garage and gutting your deer. You're doing it on the side of a mountain, a lot of times with like a headlamp or a flashlight in your mouth, and you're cutting the animal up in pieces. Usually, I like the gutless method. Not everybody does, but in one form or fashion or another, there's more than one way to skin a cat. There's more than one way to skin a deer or an elk. So generally on the West Coast, you're taking it out on your back. I do like the bones. I do like to keep the bones. I do like marrow, but they're heavy. So a lot of times I'll just bone out the meat. I'll take the meat. I do like heart and liver. But generally I'm doing a gutless method, and generally I'm packing the animal out on my back. I don't know if I've ever shot an animal out west that I could get out whole, or that I attempted to get out whole, because I like to get deep in the backcountry. But that's a major difference, right? So you'll learn it, right? I learned it. You can learn it too. Our forefathers learned it. So that's just something to be aware of. You're probably not getting them out whole. You could be a long, long way from a road, hours and hours away from a road or a path, something where you could get a vehicle, and the terrain is such in many places that you're just not going to do it. Now, I mentioned terrain, right? Not everywhere out west is huge mountains, right? Not everywhere is the Bitterroot. Not everywhere is the Sawtooth. Not everywhere is the Frank Church River No Return Wilderness. Those are all areas I really like to hunt, but not everywhere is like that, right? If you're hunting, a big chunk of Colorado is flat. It's got Rocky Mountains too, but a lot of that state is flat. A lot of Wyoming is flat. A lot of Montana is flat. It can still be some pretty rugged country, but a lot of that is flat. But if you're dealing with mountains, a lot of times they are going to be way, way bigger than the mountains, the so-called mountains back east, like the Appalachian Mountains or the Ozarks or whatever we're talking about. And again, if you are hunting public lands, it's usually a lot smaller chunks separated, like little postage stamps. So that's a major difference. The West is generally a lot drier. There are some exceptions, right? I love the Pacific Northwest. There are some very remote places in like Central Oregon. Oregon, if you look at the population density, is great. If it wasn't for Portland and the politics there, I would probably live in coastal Oregon. But the capital and that one metro area in the entire state ruins the politics of that whole state. But there are some really remote areas there. And I also lived in coastal Alaska, which is very, very wet. It's a literal rainforest. And there is actually a rainforest in Idaho that I love. I don't live there anymore, but I used to, and I loved it there. But with those exceptions, the West is generally a lot drier climate than you're used to back east. So you may find yourself at a much higher altitude in a much larger mountain range in a much drier climate. I'm often struck when I go back east to visit family that it's like a jungle there if you go back there in the spring or the summer. Like everything is so green. And there's green out here too, but it's not green like that. It's like a jungle back there. And I remember growing up, there were just months where we just didn't go in the woods because we would just get covered in ticks. I could probably count and I've lived all over the West. I've lived, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Oregon, Washington. Have I lived in Washington? Oregon, at least. I've lived there. Idaho. I could probably count on one. Maybe it would take two hands to count the number of California. Sadly, I lived there. Play taps. But I could probably count the number of ticks I've found in those 20-odd years in all those states on one hand. Maybe I'd need two hands. Last time I went walking for a walk in the woods back east with one of my buddies I grew up with, I lost count of the number of ticks, and it was like a half an hour walk. I've spent days in the wilderness out west and not found a tick. Back east, it's just like ticks are everywhere. Lyme disease, alpha-gal, all kinds of nasty, disgusting stuff. A lot of that is population density. A lot of that is moisture. A lot of that, I don't know. I think it's just a nasty place. But there are a lot more bugs out there. Generally not. Generally, kind of an afterthought. It should be a forethought if you go in the woods for much of the year back east. That like I'm going to have to deal with mosquitoes and ticks and horseflies and jiggers. Out west, that's not really a thing in most places. That's something I really like because I like going in the woods. I plan on, God willing, when I get off work today, I work as a private security contractor, going out and walking around the wilderness. And it's summertime, and I'm not concerned about ticks or mosquitoes or anything else. That's a major difference. That's a blessing. You can get some mosquitoes like during evening time if you're near a stream or something. I'm not saying they're not there, but it's nothing like back east, like where you just have swarms of horseflies chasing you around. As somebody that grew up in the south, in the swamps. So a lot less bugs in general out west, too. That's a major difference. One of the drawbacks that I will say of the west versus east hunting, because it's not all positive, the tag system out here, especially like the place where I live, it used to be like a hidden gem. Now it's like a literal world-renowned hunting spot where people come from all over the world to hunt here. The tag system is super convoluted. Back east, you generally get a hunting license. You may not even need deer tags in some places. You just may be able to take so many deer a day or whatever. But out here, getting a tag is a giant pain in the butt, even for residents. Like I can still get over-the-counter elk tags, but they're in some pretty heavily hunted units. Getting good tags out here is tough. Like one of the reasons I love the desert Southwest. I love Arizona and like New Mexico. I love those areas. But hunting there for big game is horrible. Like you have to literally win the lottery to hunt an elk in Arizona. All the time I lived in Arizona, I never drew a tag. So hunting off in some of those states is pretty bad. Here it's better, but it's not like back east where you can just hunt several deer a year or several deer a day in some states. It almost, and this is one of the things I don't like, it almost requires like a master's degree in many of the western states to even figure out how to legally hunt. Like you had better get a master's degree, do some study of law to even hunt lawfully. Like in my state, there's like some 60-some areas or zones, all with different rules and different rules for different species. Like you could be legal to hunt deer here, for this amount of time, but if you cross this stream, now you're breaking the law. And, for elk, it's something completely different, maybe a completely different zone designation. It is very convoluted. So if you're looking to hunt out west, that is something to be aware of. Don't just think, I'm going to go buy an over-the-counter tag, and, I'm going to go to Wyoming and buy an over-the-counter rifle antelope tag and just have that. Like, you had better do your research. You had better do your due diligence because it is very convoluted out west. That's one of the things I don't like. Again, one of the things I did like about back east is like generally, okay, let's say we have a 2-week rifle season and you're allowed a buck and 2 does. Okay, that's pretty simple, right? And I grew up back east when the deer were just starting to come back and you could just kind of hunt them. Now the deer are everywhere on the East Coast. That's another major difference. Deer are super populated there. They were largely extirpated, during the Depression and whatnot, and they were slowly coming back on the East Coast. Like growing up, seeing a deer was like a big deal. Now deer are everywhere back there because humans create, I remember how I said the East Coast is civilized. Well, deer are an edge species. They're crepuscular and they're an edge species, and they like man-made edges. They like suburbs. They like farm fields. They like, hedgerows, things like that. They like, the edges around fields, soybean fields, corn fields. They love that. They have a way higher population density, it said, even than when Columbus landed. There are way more white-tailed deer on the East Coast now than pre-contact. So there are a ton of deer back there, which is a great thing. So population density is way higher. If you expect to see the population density, with few exceptions, out west of deer, or especially elk or something, that you see on the East Coast, you're not going to. It's not a thing. Back east, you might have X amount of deer per square mile. Out here, you may have square miles per deer or elk, right? So it's a big difference. It's something to wrap your head around. Also, there's generally even though there's a lot more deer back east per square mile in most places, there's a lot more to hunt out west, which is, I think, one of the reasons it's become a world-renowned hunting spot, right? Just things that I can hunt, over-the-counter tags, not even counting like special draw tags. But, two species of deer. Got whitetail, got mule deer, got elk, got black bear, have wolf, have mountain lion. I guess you could count coyote if you wanted to, although you got those back east now. We didn't have those growing up. Never saw a coyote, never heard of a coyote growing up back east. They were a western thing. Now they're on the east coast. But, and if you count draw tags, right, we got all kinds of different bighorns, desert bighorns, Rocky Mountain bighorns. We got, and there's two species of elk. If you count draw tags, there's a Roosevelt elk and the Rocky Mountain elk. Draw tags, you got moose, you have mountain goat. There's a lot more different things to hunt out here if you can get a tag. Pronghorn, which in some places is an over-the-counter tag or an unlimited draw tag. So there's that. There's a lot more different species to hunt out here. Also, the West is vast, so there's a lot of different habitat. And going back to that rainforest, you could be hunting the rainforest. You could be hunting, mule deer in Nevada. Those are completely different. It might as well be different countries, right? They're so completely different. So when you think about Western hunting, what are you thinking about? Because I've hunted all over it. There's a big difference between hunting the coastal rainforest of Oregon for black bear versus hunting, let's say central Arizona. Even in one state, right, there's a big difference between hunting, the plains, the Great Plains of Montana versus like the Bitterroot. It's a big difference. It's a whole different country. The distances are vast. Look at the difference. Look at the distance between Washington, D.C., and Richmond, Virginia, right? The capital of the Confederacy and the capital of the Union during the Civil War. Look at that distance. Then look at the difference. Just pick like Idaho. Look at the difference between, let's say Pocatello, Idaho to Bonners Ferry, Idaho. That's in one state. Look at that distance compared to the difference between the capital of the Confederacy in the South and the capital of the Union. It's a way bigger It's a way bigger distance. And way different environments. Podcast is going kind of long. I said there was a lot to it, but I'm going to touch on one other major difference is migrations, right? Deer, elk here have what we call winter range. They can migrate hundreds of miles from where they are in one part of the year to another part of the year. Back east, generally, whitetail are fairly territorial. You may get the oddball, but in general, they live their whole life within a few square miles, if that. Not out west. They can travel vast distances. Up high in the mountains where you might find elk in the summer, when the snow starts melting off and you get that green grass way up in the alpine country, they're not there in the winter unless they're dead, right? Because there's feet and feet of snow. They migrate. You don't have the vast elevation changes back east. Like you could go from 12,000 feet elevation to a couple hundred feet above sea level in a few hundred miles out here. So, and it's completely different climates, completely different habitats. You can go from like the Great Basin, northern Great Plains to high up in the Rockies in a few hundred miles. So, animals migrate. They can migrate a lot. Pronghorn. They don't migrate as much, but they can migrate quite a bit. And elk and mule deer, they migrate quite a bit. So don't think in like the East Coast terms of like this is this deer's habitat. Like this is this deer's, like this is its bedding area and this is its feeding area, and that's pretty much it unless he goes into rut and chases a doe somewhere. That's pretty much where it is. That's not how it is for mule deer and elk. They migrate vast distances. That's something you'll have to get used to if you're planning on coming out west and hunting. These are just some of the distinctions between eastern and western hunting. One brief one you probably know about, but I'm going to touch on. Back east, you would say like an 8-pointer if you were talking about a deer. Like, it was an 8-pointer. It had 8 points. Out here, out west, you would say it was a 4x4. same number of points, but I hear you just say a 4x4. Right? They'll know you're a carpetbagger if you're like, oh, it's a 12-point elk. No, it was a 6x6, right? So just that's a minor cultural difference. A little rolling into the tactical tip of the day. Going into the tactical tip of the day, camo. Usually doesn't matter. A lot of times I don't even bother with it. But if you are a camo junkie and you're like fixated on this camo versus that camo, I mentioned that the West is much drier. So I generally find that most camo patterns are too dark. They're almost always too dark rather than too light. Again, if you're hunting in like the rainforest of, coastal Pacific Northwest, you might want some dark camo. But for most of the West, lighter is generally better. I tend to find that most camo patterns are too dark rather than too light. In fact, I'll generally opt to wear just like khaki pants or like a safari type or like a khaki colored shirt or something like that, or a very beige colored shirt rather than camo at all, because the camo is too dark. The point of camo is to blend in. If the camo is too dark, doesn't matter what pattern it is, it's not going to blend in well. So if you're looking at coming out west, tend towards the lighter camo patterns. You might even find something that doesn't make a lot of sense but blends in better, like duck camo, like the dead grass camo. The dead grass, East Coast, like dead grass marsh camo, actually can blend in pretty well in the desert because it's dead grass. So just keep that in mind. Generally, lighter is going to serve you better in most places out west for camo patterns. Your tactical verse of the day. Tying into hunting. We've been hunting a long time. How about a reading from Genesis 27? How about we do that for the tactical verse of the day? Now then, get your equipment, your quiver and bow, and go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. That's in Genesis, right? We've been hunting a long time. With that, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.